Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I would like first to apologize for not being with you this morning due to an urgent engagement at the Lebanese Parliament in its session today. But I did not want to miss the opportunity to participate in the discussion of a very important issue at a very important time in the history of our region. Dear friends, maybe many don't necessarily see the connection between food security and the Arab Spring. In fact, some don't even consider the economic factors as crucial issues in the build-up, breakout, or even transition phase of the Arab Spring movement. But let us remember together that this revolutionary movement that drew the map of the Arab world was first sparked by the self-immolation of a vegetable cart vendor, and that the demonstrations that followed were also objecting to the fast increase in foodstuff prices in Tunisia and Algeria. Of course, that is not to say that the issue of food security or even economic deprivation was at the forefront of the movements. The Arab Spring was and remains first and foremost about dignity, freedom, and justice, values that were often breached or sidelined in our part of the world. But the economic factors have always been at the source of feelings of marginalization that fueled the demonstrations. It is also clear that the causes of unrest run deep and have accumulated over time. The economic and social factors brewed for a long time, and they have also become intertwined with the political factors. In fact, the political and economic marginalization reinforced each other as the lack of political democracy, accountability, and justice was combined with and also facilitated crony capitalism and poor governance. This has led the benefits of the so-called half-baked economic reforms, such as non-transparent privatization and sales of state assets, to be channeled into the hands of the select few. In addition, most of the times, the Arab authorities were not frank enough with their people about the challenges so that they could pave the way for the essential reforms that could allow for a better use of the scarce resources. So while macro indicators of growth, fiscal deficit, exchange rates were often okay, most socioeconomic indicators such as unemployment rate, poverty levels, and food security kept deteriorating. Among the indicators that were reaching alarming levels in Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Morocco, Syria, and Tunisia, and an IMF paper illustrates that more than half of the working age youth population is unemployed, while another study shows that food security has deteriorated in most countries in the region as a result of the global commodity pricing crisis in 2007-2008 and in 2010-2011. The accumulated causes of unrest have created pent-up demand and high expectations by the people in the countries in transition, as well as in other countries that face similar conditions. This presents a great challenge on how to manage the transition in times of actually deteriorating economic conditions, collapsing investment, and rising unemployment. But yet, more and more demands and higher expectations. The truth of the matter is that more awareness creates even more expectations, and managing this fine balance is one of the key challenges of the policymakers in general and during the times of transition in particular. Ladies and gentlemen, overcoming this challenge is actually one of the most critical factors for the success of the transition process at a time when the acute conditions are actually making the chronic challenges more complicated. Let me clarify. Let me clarify with a specific example related to the issue of food security. This issue presents a serious challenge in our Arab region, which have a high dependency on food imports due to simultaneously high demand driven by high population growth and changes in patterns of consumption, as well as limited potential for agricultural growth due to water constraints as well as deficient water management practices. To give a specific example, the Arab countries are the world's largest net importer of cereals in the world, with a gap that totaled about 58.2 million metric tons in the year of 2007. This applies as well, but in varying degrees, to other food items. This high dependency on food imports creates the continuous need for foreign exchange for import financing purposes. But the conditions created by the transition are actually those that have exactly diminished the capacity for generating foreign exchange. Tourism, foreign direct investments, and remittances are all down, not just in Arab Spring countries, but in most of the Arab world, except in the oil-producing countries. This is an illustration of how deep-rooted factors and acute conditions are coming together to widen further the gap between expectations and challenges during this crucial transition in the Arab world, calling urgently for reforms. This actually reminds us of an old wisdom, that deep and real reforms are best done when we can rather than when we must, as then both the cost and the pain will be higher and the efficiency lower when we do them under pressure. Still, and despite the current circumstances, we should not waste additional time, and we hence should move to tackle immediately the crucial issues that are posing a challenge to our economy and our society. Food security, employment, fiscal reforms, subsidy design are all examples of hot issues where several chronic and acute factors intertwine and add further to the complexity of the transition. Ladies and gentlemen, according to research, the Gulf states, including Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates, face a low risk of food insecurity. Libya and Tunisia exhibit moderate risk of food insecurity, whereas all other Arab countries show serious, alarming, or extremely alarming levels of food insecurity risks. To me, these results are deeply discomforting, at least for two reasons. The first is that they reflect the fact that food security poses a clear and present impending danger in most countries undergoing a transition. Egypt, Yemen, and Syria, as well as the countries where some political reforms are being undertaken, like Jordan and Morocco. The second reason is that the divergence on such matters in a region that shares a common language, a common history, and a common cultural heritage has dangerous implications not just on the specific concerned countries, but on the overall Arab world. Can we even imagine such wide divide existing between Western and Eastern Europe? Or between the US and Central America? In fact, at the heart of the free trade agreements and economic unions that were created over the last 2 decades lies the fundamental realization that the well-being of your neighbor is of your own well-being in a world where frontiers and geographical borders have lost much of their relevance. My worry is that divergence in the Arab countries' socio-economic landscape is widening at exactly the time when we need it to be converging, so that it could create an anchor for Arab countries in transition. The experience of other regions, be it the Marshall Plan in the wake of the World War II, that provided an anchor to Western Europe and arrested its slippage into communism, or be it in the convergence to the European Union and the promise and focus it provided to the Eastern European countries as they transitioned into democracy, or even the impact of NAFTA and its effect on Mexico, which shortly became afterwards an OECD country. These are all examples of the importance of grand regional economic schemes and their positive influence, not just on the socio-economic well-being of nations, but also on the very success of the democratic movements within them. My dear friends, I would like to reiterate on this occasion a vision that I launched in the Kuwait Arab Economic Summit of 2009, of a stronger Arab economic integration that touches on all sectors, and especially those related to energy, transport, and food security, bringing closer the Arab world and bridging the gaps among its people. It is essential to note that this initiative is in no way based on a concept of charity from those who have to those who have not, but is rather based on a concept of a region investing in its own well-being and its broader development and welfare. A region that is investing in its own security and sustainable development. Take water, for example. The Arab individual share of water is less than 1,000 cubic meters per year, in comparison with over 7,000 cubic meters per year for the world's average. This Arab average is subject to the risk of further decreases due to factors ranging from demographic changes to climate change to security issues, which will have significant negative impact on our Arab citizens, their development, prospects, and their food security. Or take the power sector. Production and consumption of power in the region are characterized by unsustainable patterns that are highly damaging for the environment. There is a need. There is a need for a new sustainable production approach in this sector, where the Arab world holds over 60% of the proven world reserves of oil and over 40% of proven world reserves of gas. Meanwhile, we have a significant shortage of oil and gas pipelines, as well as electrical transport and connection nets. So the need is urgent to invest in cross-borders mega projects in the key sectors such as transport, energy, and water, which are crucial to society but are also important factors of production for the other sectors. These mega projects should attempt to bring our Arab countries closer together, reducing the cost and increasing the efficiency in sectors that are important for the well-being of the society and also for the other productive sectors of the economy, such as manufacturing and agriculture. For instance, shouldn't the cost of important agricultural products from Sudan be lower for other Arab countries than importing from Europe and South America if there were routes and highways connecting agricultural areas of Sudan to Sudanese ports? Ladies and gentlemen, let me here clarify one caveat. It is not sufficient to spend more on a certain sector, like agriculture, to have immediately positive results regarding reducing poverty or increasing food sufficiency. In this context, allow me also to share with you some observations regarding the agricultural sector in the Arab world. The evidence has actually shown that agricultural growth does not have strong influence on poverty reduction in the Arab world, despite the fact that the share of the rural population exceeds 40% in the Arab world and even 60% in countries such as Yemen or Sudan. The reason is that a large proportion of this rural population does not even work in agriculture due to lack of opportunities and development in this sector. A recent study shows that the rural poor in the Arab world earn a large majority of their income from non-agricultural activities. They work instead in low-value added services or in the informal economy. So it's going to take more than financial engagement from those who can. It will take years, if not decades, of planning to shift production and consumption habits and patterns and allow key sectors to become financially viable so that they could generate investment and employment and be economically sustainable so that they could generate growth and development. In this context, the Arab countries outside the GCC region have a great responsibility in enacting the needed structural reforms that are needed to make both growth and spending more pro-poor, as the evidence points to large inefficiencies in the conduct of economic and social policies in this regard. Ladies and gentlemen, before I outline these needed reforms, allow me to share with you again some of the facts and figures that compare our region to other regions in the world. Real per capita GDP growth averaged 1.7% in Arab countries other than GCC in the last 2 decades, i.e. from 1990 till 2010. Growth, however, was mostly driven by the low value-added services, with manufacturing growing at 1% on average, and actually many countries recording a negative per capita manufacturing growth, such as Algeria, Iraq, Yemen, Lebanon, and Syria. Agriculture growth was dismal across the board and actually negative in 13 Arab countries. This low per capita growth rates in the labor-intensive sectors explains the sluggish job creation. Furthermore, recent research suggests that, unlike the rest of the world, overall growth does not translate into poverty reduction in the Arab world. All this raises a very important issue of how to make growth pro-poor in the Arab world. And in fact, global experience shows that manufacturing-led growth, i.e. labor-intensive, as well as high productivity growth, high value-added services, are the most important drivers of poverty reduction and increased food security. So, growth in the Arab world is not necessarily pro-poor, but growth is not entirely in the hands of the government. So what about government expenditures? In fact, government spending as a share of GDP is the highest in the Arab region. Arab governments' total spending on agriculture, education, health, infrastructure, social protection, and other sectors averages around 27% of GDP. This compares with an average of 16 to 18% in Latin America, the Caribbean, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Asia-Pacific regions. But this size of the spending does not in itself say much about the efficiency of this spending. In fact, the relationship between public spending and growth is very different in the Arab world than in the rest of the world. Research by the World Bank shows that spending $1 additional by a government in the Arab region yields only about half the growth of $1 spent in the rest of the world. This raises serious concerns regarding the effectiveness of public spending in the Arab world, and shows that there is real room for significant improvement in terms of government efficiency and productivity, and in terms of better use of available scarce resources. A detailed look at the World Bank research shows two important factors behind the poor effectiveness of public spending in the Arab world. The first factor is education spending, which in the study for the rest of the world is a major determinant of growth. But education spending in the Arab world as a whole has somehow a negative effect on growth, raising really alarming questions about the quality of education systems and the effectiveness of public service delivery in our region. In addition, it seems that education in the Arab world no longer rewards quality and is not adapting to the need of the market, and therefore in some instances is contributing further to unemployment. According to 2009 UNDP report, education quality and type do not match labor market demand, especially in vocational fields. The second factor, more closely related to our topic today, is the large amount of subsidies that feature in Arab public spending. Fuel subsidy, and in some countries, food subsidies are often higher than the targeted social spending. Let's take, for example, two Arab Spring countries in Egypt and Syria. Food and fuel subsidies, accounting for about 20% of public spending, are more than twofold higher than spending on social protection programs and health combined. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, the word reforms has not always been used or implemented properly in the Arab world, because policies has often been planned and implemented top-down. They were never properly explained to the public. They often been half-baked in their region, in their design, and in many cases, they benefited only the few. But today, it is high time for real deep and effective reforms, because simply there are no other credible alternatives. The brave young men and women who took to the streets in Cairo, Tunis, Benghazi, Syria, and other Arab Spring cities are expecting more freedom and participation, but also a better life and promising prospects. To their bad luck, these events have been launched and continue to take place in the midst of global economic crisis still unfolding, particularly in the US and Europe, which are the usual sources of trade and external financial support to the Arab region. In addition to the limited scope of foreign support, the increases in public sector wages and higher subsidies before and after the Arab Spring movement is leaving governments in a very difficult fiscal situation. The repercussions of the Arab Spring on the balance of payments in many countries has reduced any room of maneuver that policymakers could have. Of course, had the Arab Spring taken place later, the cost could have been even much higher. These constraints leave to us very little options. But from the jaws of the challenges, we should snatch the opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, let me sum up. Let me sum up and summarize with a proposal of a plan with 3 tracks. The first track is to design and implement a common Arab economic integration agenda that starts with the launching of cross-border mega projects in the key sectors of transport, power, energy, and water. These projects should be financially viable and be attractive to the issue of cost recovery so that institutional investors could actively take part of them. They should bring the Arab world closer and reduce the cost of production and distribution through efficiency gains. These mega projects should be accompanied by tax breaks and other fiscal incentives, and as well by more conducive business environment that would make it attractive to the private sector and allow it to create synergies which would trickle down and help generate the jobs that are needed by our economies and ultimately help lift people out of poverty. But for that reason to happen, a second track needs to be pursued in parallel by the governments of the countries that are undertaking a transition, or those who want to take part of the promises of tomorrow. It consists of pushing ahead with needed reforms at the institutional, legal, regulatory levels, as well as those related to the judiciary. The creation of the proper investment climate, and above, allow for the implementation of all the governance issues. Progress on the infrastructure front should be complemented by progress on the suprastructure front, something that the Arab countries have always been weak at. Together with the stabilization of the security situation, the normalization of the democratic process that reduces uncertainty in the long run. These structural reforms will contribute to stronger investments in labor-intensive sectors such as manufacturing, and with time will lead to stronger investments in the high value-added services. These sectors will generate large-scale employment, absorb the educated youth into the economy, and lift people out of poverty, hence fostering food security. The third track is to rethink and implement a new approach to social safety nets that ease the transition and protect the most vulnerable at these difficult times in our society. As I mentioned previously, not just growth in the Arab world, but also government spending is not effectively pro-poor. Probably we need to learn from the experience of other countries, such as Brazil, for instance, on how optimal design of social safety nets, especially the Bolsa Familia, has not just protected the poor from adverse economic conditions, but actually lifted masses out of poverty and contributed directly to higher growth and stronger investments through the higher additional purchasing power of the emerging middle class. Ladies and gentlemen, food security is an issue that brings together the macro and the micro, the economy and the human, the government and the private sector. I hope that by focusing on such issues, we can effectively approach crucial socio-economic matters and tackle deep-rooted obstacles to growth and development in our Arab region. These problems are now much clearer in times of Arab Spring, but also the opportunity has never been better to address them and provide our future generations with the best possible prospects. My dear friends, I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and I really wish you a very successful conference. Thank you.